Jason, Dr. Fox.
Hey.
Welcome to the On Meaningful Work podcast, although I should say it's now the Finding Meaning in Work.
Oh, okay. Brilliant.
Had a bit of a rebrand,
Nice.
which I'm still getting used to myself, but...
What spurred the rebrand?
So I just felt that On Meaningful Work sounded on, as in iron. It was more preachy.
Yes,
Whereas Finding Meaning in Work was more about from the bottom up.
I love that.
Yeah.
No, you're right. The on kind of implies like hierarchy or something, like unintentionally, but like finding. Yeah. Ooh, good
And also I wanted to open it up to people of various occupations. You know, you could be doing any sort of jobs, but then how do you find meaning in what you're doing?
Nice.
Whereas I found On Meaningful Work a little bit exclusionary in that
I get it though. I mean, I've done similar word plays too, where it's like you're kind of going in as an explorer and you're talking about on the topic of, but the nature of this work is inevitably you find yourself entangled and enmeshed and So finding is good.
Yeah, and also something I'm coming to realize is that meaningful work itself is such a luxury, in that.
Yes, in this day and age, with the AI slop taking over everything,
for sure.
It's like meaning is a rare privilege,
Exactly.
amongst the drudgery of work. Yeah.
So that's why I also wanted to shift that if you don't have that luxury, if you're working in a job that you're doing to put food on the table, how can you still find meaning in that?
There's a quote from the philosopher James Cass, who wrote a book, Finite and Infinite Games.
Love that.
A vision of life as play and possibility. He says, whomever must play cannot play.
Yeah.
And by the same token, I believe that, meaning can't be forced. You can't like say to folks like, these, whatever it is you're doing, you can't force meaning. But I think sometimes we forget how some roles actually meaningfully contribute to the larger story that we're part of, to society. So even jobs that would, modernity kind of pushes off to the side, the shit jobs, the kind of things like that, other cultures have a way of actually revering and surfacing the meaning, the mastery, the contribution, the qualities that I feel like in hyper-capitalist late-stage modernity we tend to kind of dismiss, whereas it's nice to be in context where that is reminded. But it's tricky though, because we're not glorifying that on social media. We're not. But then at the same time, there's a bit of an undercurrent or a shift away from all of the vanity metrics and all of the kind of the things that would previously be associated with the glamorous work.
Yeah. So just on that, and we'll get to your story, but I read a study once of that they looked at hospital orderlies, and they wanted to see do they find their work meaningful, and the results of the study were that there were two groups of people, like one group who definitely did not, like they were doing it for the paycheck, but there was a second group who did. And the reason they did was that they didn't see themselves as... So this was in a hospital, orderlies in a hospital. They didn't see themselves as just orderlies. They saw themselves as part of the healthcare system of the patient. And then also a few of them brought their own personalities to it. There was one who was really into art. So she was looking after the room of a comatose patient, and every day she would, not every day, but occasionally she would change the art in the person's room. And the researchers asked her, why did you do that? She's like, I love art. And when this person wakes up, I'd like them to be surrounded by beautiful things.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And then you can also imagine some context where there is some manager that says, so you're not allowed to do that, It's like,
exactly.
just, determined to stamp out any potential of meaning blossoming.
For sure.
But on that token, have you seen the movie Perfect Days?
No.
By Wim Wenders? Follows the story of a janitor in Japan, and profound meaning that comes from the day-to-day routines around that work. It's a good one.
And speaking of which, have you seen the Woodstock documentary?
I haven't. Okay.
It's a masterpiece, and it's really a time capsule of. But there's a segment where they interview the guy cleaning the portaloos.
Oh, yeah.
And they asked him, why are you doing this? He's like, oh, I've got kids myself. My son is now in Vietnam,
Nice.
So I want to make sure these kids...
There's a thing here, though, that like these conversations always run the risk of being at once wise, warm, and a little bit cute, in the sense that like they can be easily dismissed because when presented with, look, here's this profoundly meaningful role, or here's more money, we have such a... The way that metrics tend to distort our view of reality, if something can be turned into a metric or a number and then attached to money, it often obfuscates the true value and the relationality and the meaning and depth of the work because people want the optionality of more money.
Yeah, and I think that's the danger. Like money definitely plays into it. Social pressure, keeping up the social standing, that could definitely drive you away into work that you're not really, or you don't really find meaningful.
And the irony is that the pursuit of money for money's sake usually lends, if that's the only thing that's going on, usually leads people to a place where they feel profoundly unhappy and that their life lacks meaning.
Yeah.
And the meaning can't be fabricated by just simply acquiring more stuff.
Yeah.
There's something deeper at play.
Yeah, and Paul Graham wrote an essay called "How to Do What You Love," and he said the two things that will get you off the path is money for sure, but the second thing is prestige, where you're trying to keep up, the social view of yourself, and then you end up doing things you'd like to do rather than you actually should do. Like to do rather.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Anyway, Jason, just with you, one thing I like to start off with is you've really, I love this persona that you built of the wizard-philosopher. How did you come about that?
It's kind of you to ask. There's a few things. I realized that when you're doing work on stage, you kind of need to bring an amplified aspect of yourself. You need to be a little larger than life. Well, not so much larger than life. It still needs to be authentic, but there's an amplification. So if I'm feeling tired, but I'm giving a keynote to 1,000 people, it's not appropriate for bringing my tired energy into that. I need to find other aspects to dial up. So there's an awareness around aspects that are, the quest for knowledge and insight and so on. And this also comes in a context where thought leaders were becoming a growing term. I used to mentor in the Thought Leaders Business School, and then everyone was doing TED Talks, and there was all these experts out there, which as someone who's previously an academic, I just thought, I don't quite identify with those terms, but wizard is a nice archetype that conveys enough meaning that people can kind of, even though it seems playful, they can kind of sense as to the role amidst it all. And it gives me a lot of maneuverability to explore things that I'd consider to be magic, like phenomena that exist at a complexity beyond our ability to easily explain.
Phenomenal. Can I ask, how was that, when you're starting off, how was that received in the work that you do?
It's so interesting. So when I was quite early into it, people told me I need to shave my beard because corporate wouldn't hire anyone with a beard. Then I was doing the wizard stuff, and people confused it with magician and illusionist and someone who performs at kids parties. So mostly not received well, and that's fine. Like it's like there's an amusement to it. But increasingly nowadays, I feel like it's perhaps a generational shift. I feel like folks that are a little bit more online, a little bit more aware of memetics, can attune to what's like, can attune to the sincere irony of it.
And maybe going back to your background, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Western Australia,
so really? Okay.
But there was quite almost during my university, doing my PhD there. I feel like life began anew when I then moved to Melbourne soon after doing the PhD. There was a chance to really find myself in a whole new context, new relationships, new people, and And also, I used to speak at high schools, teaching students how to enjoy exams and things like that.
Yeah.
And my PhD was in motivation and behaviour change.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd share some of that stuff. But then coming to Melbourne, none of that stuff worked, and I had a year that was really challenging, which forced me to kind of go deeper into what value I might be able to bring. And I seem to have found an angle that seemed to work and resonate, and that's led me to the midlife crisis I'm in at the moment. So here we are.
Yeah, here we are indeed. But going back to your childhood, what were you like in school? Were you...
Oh, growing up with the red hair is very character building. I was short. I have this very fair-skinned complexion, so I was an easy target for bullies, which is character building. I think it taught me a lot of empathy. I grew up in a split family, which was interesting in terms of being able to be immersed in different perspectives, which has contributed to a strength of being able to synthesize multiple perspectives, or at least to kind of not hold singular versions of truth, but to be able to entertain multiple versions of truth. So childhood was nice, growing up near the ocean, growing up near coastal wetlands, a lot of time spent playing on sand dunes and in our, what we call the big swamp, pretending to be a Ninja Turtle back then. I'm curious, why do you ask about the childhood? This is great. I've never had this question before. Yeah.
Because I think in my experience, especially speaking with people who I think have found meaning in what they do, and also, reading biographies of people, I feel that there's something in childhood that really speaks to that.
Yeah.
That
Good call.
there's a seed that's planted.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah.
Because childhood is where we often experience a lot of our wounds as well, which we have the maladaptive response to, which then can turn into a kind of twisted strength.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, this is good. I'm always wary when you ask that, am I just rolling out a narrative that's a little too neat, because we have our own kind of narrative fallacy that we've groomed over time.
Sure.
But then there's truth amidst the fallacy. So
for sure. I mean, and I think there's also truth in the neatness or the unneatness.
Yeah. Of all possible arrangements, this is what we've come up with. Yeah.
And
has anyone flipped this question on you, by the way?
Not in the podcast, no.
Oh, interesting. How would you, as a quick little summary, describe your childhood?
Well, I grew up in Mumbai, in India, and I grew up in a large family. So I've got 3 sisters, 1 brother, and I suppose I was a daydreamer as a kid. I didn't really fit in school. I had my particular obsessions, like I was really into music and movies and all of that. But I was, I think, okay enough just to get through school as a slightly above average student. But yeah, like you said, you moving to Melbourne from Perth. I think me moving to Melbourne from Mumbai, it's where, to use a very psychedelic term, the doors of perception started to open. But again, it took, a long time. Like I did engineering at uni because that was coming from India. That was the thing to do. So it just took a lot of time to...
It would have been very interesting landing in Melbourne. I mean, I found my first year here really challenging because I feel like Melbourne slowly opens up its secrets to you, and it's once you kind of know the little hidden alleyways or the cafe, and you build that relational, web, things start to blossom. But it takes a little bit of time.
I mean, I came as a 17-year-old, so I had no idea.
Oh, right. Yeah. The cafe scene wasn't even humming then.
No, there wasn't. I mean, if it was humming, I wouldn't have known about it.
Okay, cool. Well, it's nice. And I'm sure there's many more depths amidst it. Don't want to hijack your...
No. So maybe, say, sticking with school, for example, was school something you thought as worthwhile, or something you needed to be subverted, or...
Primary school was and high school, both of them. No, I did not have a good time. I quite genuinely, I felt a bit of an outsider. There were, like, some of the bullying was literally very violent that happened in where I grew up. And yeah, you kind of had to survive, and I found my nerdy little group of friends that would play Dungeons and Dragons in the library during lunchtime because it was safe, and and then Magic the Gathering and all of that stuff, and I had some good friends. But again, it's really the shift into university where the real kind of next blossoming emerged, where I was able to study eco-philosophy and other things like that. That saw me hiking in the Kimberley for 2 weeks with a bunch of other eco-philosophers.
Wow. Yeah.
Swimming naked with the whole class and the teacher in water holes, and being under the immense cosmos of the desert night sky with no light pollution. It's just phenomenal awakenings from an ecological perspective.
Yeah, wow. When did you discover science fiction? And is that something that, because just reading about you, that seems like a big... I'm baffled. I'm constantly baffled by how few folks within leadership positions, particularly within tech roles, how few people read science fiction. Mm-hmm. So I started off with fantasy. Or fiction in general, I think.
Yeah. I know, right? Yeah. Beyond just some Netflix shows that have been, watched. So science fiction happened to... that was probably around university. It was mostly fantasy up until university. Science fiction, there's this commonality around world building and playing around the edges of what is possible. And the other thing that happens is when you read fiction, as you know, it deepens your empathy because you're literally living out multiple lives. And that, folks that are voracious readers that appreciate fiction, science fiction, fantasy, all those things, you then synthesize worldviews that just your ability to relate to other people and perspectives, your ability to see hardships in a greater context. When looping back to meaning, I feel like it adds vocabulary to what the potentiality of meaning making. Yeah.
And that seems like something that stayed with you throughout, and it's something that you really incorporate in the work that you do.
I try to. It's. I feel like sometimes I need to smuggle it in because most of my work happens within enterprise land, and they're often metric obsessed and fixated on short-term goals for maximizing profits and returns. And yet sometimes you have lovely folk working within enterprise land that have a bit more of a broader lens on what's possible. And when you can find those folks and figure out how can I be an accomplice to what you're intending to achieve here. And normally the role that I play is warming things up, bringing a sense of the imagination into things, whilst also trying to pull at the threads of patriarchy, trying to dissolve hierarchy a little bit to soften and warm and really attune people to more qualitative indicators of what meaningful progress might be, rather than simply perpetuating a rich delusion of progress, which is what often happens. Yeah,
and I think maybe something in common we have is looking at the status quo and trying to see, okay, how can meaningful progress happen from here?
Totally. Yeah. And I love the sense that choosing to not choose to do anything differently is still a choice. Yeah. And that choice has implications. And when we contrast the implications of that choice against multiple possible future contexts, and you start to see the common incoherencies amongst it all, people start to realize, our trajectory is leading us towards irrelevance. Perhaps we should start to change some things.
For sure. Yeah.
But it's hard for them to get there unless we got to take them into the tension of doing nothing.
Yeah. And I think, we talked about, how people can be swayed by money and prestige. I think that works for organizations as well. Like if your profit margins are healthy and, your customers are quote unquote happy, then it's tough to see things down the line that might.
So what we're seeing right now is like the rivalrous obligate dynamics of artificial intelligence. Just this morning, we found out that Google is now beginning to investigate artificial intelligence and weapons. It's like this.
Yeah,
You can understand there's money to be made, and the whole thing is like, well, if we don't do it, someone else will, and so it's this collective multipolar trap where we are obligated to compete in something that ultimately leads us to omni-lose scenarios.
I'm going to come back to that.
Sure.
But maybe going back to your story, and
I tend to deflect away from my story, by the way. So well done on your persistence. Yeah.
Yeah, I think part of my job here is to get you back to you.
Okay. Thank you for the therapy. Yes.
Yeah. So then, what did you choose as your first? After you finished school, what did you choose as your first university?
It was in ecological sciences, so environmental science, which.
And so, what drove that decision?
There was a point where I was either going to go into law or I was going to go into environmental sciences. I took a year break, a gap year, and I just worked for a year. I was a kitchen hand, and I did a course, just in environmental stuff to see if I liked it. And I realized it was one of those things, like the only thing that I knew about law is the prestige stuff, like from what I heard, impressive sports cars and making lots of money. And I realized I actually really appreciate living systems and I want to learn more. So I did the environmental science, which is really this kind of smorgasbord of different things, but also a little bit bleak because it would be like overpopulation, soil health, air pollution, heavy metal contaminations, extinctions, all of these things. And then the last, week 13, hope. And there is this sense of, for quite a long time, scientists have been trying to build the case for things like climate change, global warming. I think we can accept now that we don't actually need more facts. It's more ice cores showing us the actual evidence of it. It's not going to change things. So this pursuit of living systems, environmental systems, which is really building capability and complexity as distinct from complicated systems, which is very fascinating from your transition from engineering into this kind of work, because in my experience, coders, programmers, engineers tend to take more of a closed system mechanical view of things, like what's the problem, where can we fix it, how do we optimize the system, which is great for a machine, but for a living system that's open-ended and interconnected, there's a different sensibility we need. That grounded me in that. But I then did my honours year, and then I had the opportunity to stay on and do a PhD. I'm so glad that I did that, because if I didn't, I would be going off and working for a mining organisation, helping them to rehabilitate the land, but effectively just helping them to get away with incredible devastation.
Or what's the term? Greenwashing.
Yes, that's right. I would have been complicit in that. I mean, I would feel like I was doing good work, but as part of the bigger system, I was essentially enabling it. And so I did the PhD, and whilst I was doing the PhD, I found myself playing a lot of World of Warcraft. My PhD was in motivation and behaviour change.
So how did you choose that topic as a PhD?
My supervisor, it was just one of those things that was available. There were some research funds for healthy aging.
Okay. My
research looked specifically at how to influence the behaviours pertaining to healthy aging for early retirees, because there's a sense that the population is getting older, and there was this acknowledged fact that when people retire, their physical health goes down because they're often not moving as much. Their social health goes down because they're not hanging out with their workmates as much. Their mental health goes down because they're not engaged in meaningful challenges as much. And across many indicators, health just seems to plummet. And I was like, well, how can we how can we address that? But it was more what was happening along the side. I was doing that, but then I was playing World of Warcraft, and somehow this game was more effective at sustaining my focus and attention than the PhD research was. I got curious about that. I wrote a book called The Game Changer, which brought some of that insight. I finished the PhD, but I published the book. It became a bestseller, but gamification became a big buzzword at the time, which took, I would say, a really cheapened, superficial look at the deeper complexities of what goes into game design, and I got frustrated with that.
So gamification just became this term where, you add a few ticks and you add a few,
points, badges, leaderboards,
few carrots, all of that.
That's right. The aesthetics of games,
What were they missing? Like, what was?
It's a very kind question. I know you know, but like you're doing the podcast thing where you just, that's lovely. I mean, the curiosity and empathy were the core things. There's this tendency I found within executive teams to look for quick fixes, familiar solutions, and default ways of doing things. And what gamification presented was a repackaging of the same default modes, just with a few bells and whistles of like, instead of actually, caring about workers, we can exploit them better by having them, buy into these schemes that have them be more productive. To be fair, though, there are some good principles amongst it. The more that we can short-circuit feedback loops between effort and meaningful sense of progress, the more likely people are to invest effort into things. The more that we can calibrate the level of challenge based upon skill, we can more likely be able to have people in flow, as you know from Miele Csikszentmihalyi's flow model. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. It just got cheapened because people were seeking a quick fix.
Yes.
That's what ultimately led me to write How to Lead a Quest, which was a book for folks that are looking to lead beyond the default. And that involves sensibilities around sensing into uncertainty and ambiguity and developing some sensibilities around complexity.
This may be a slight tangent, but say, going back to engineering, it's something I struggled with when I was doing it, but I'm glad I did it because it gave me a problem-solving mindset.
And building too.
And building, but also what it did, talking about systems, it kind of made me view situations as a complicated system, in that there's an input, there has to be an output. All that's required is a bunch of equations in the middle. But of course, life is complex and relationships are complex. But I wonder that. So most leaders now have come from the mindset of, most of them are engineers or they're lawyers. I wonder if you see now, especially in the age of AI, like the importance of a liberal arts education in. There's
this fascinating person, David Chapman, who writes this blog called Meta-Rationality. Have you come across it?
I haven't, no.
Effectively, one of the things is that one of the pathways to meta-rationality, which is where you actually can see the limitations of rational thinking and work to improve it, so you're not limited by rationality, you can actually think critically about rationality, is, there you go, if you need some water.
Thank you.
A lot of what happens with mathematics or any of the STEM pathways is you come to the limits of theory. You realize actually this theory doesn't apply in this sense, or it's not actually universal, and you then encounter nebulosity, where you realize that these things don't work, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything's meaningless. It's not nihilistic, although a lot of people fall into the nihilistic abyss. There's still meaning there, but it's nebulous. So I'm coming back to this question of the liberal arts things. Undoubtedly, we need more artists, we need more poets. I think that a lot of these days, artists have kind of forgotten their true calling. It's been co-opted by social media. It's become, for many, simply about creating things that are aesthetically pleasing, and that's still nice. That's a role. But the real role of artists and poets is to subvert the existing paradigm and to help open up portals to new possibilities, to help us to... What was that? You mentioned the psychedelic term, the doorways of...
Doors of perception.
Open the doors of perception. This is exactly what is needed, because my worry with AI is that we're going to have this vortex of midwittery, which we're going to get sucked into this mediocre, self-replicating thing. Undoubtedly, it's going to spin off some amazing things. But people are going to start seeing it as a source of truth, and seeing it and kind of not escaping the complicated and I'd say also complex system that it is. But we need our outliers. We need the folks on the periphery that can open up some other pathways. Otherwise, we will get sucked into the vortex.
Because also a danger with AI, and especially LLMs, is that the outputs are just fancy repackaging of stuff that's already.
Yeah, it's. I mean, sometimes it can throw some surprising synthesis, and when you're working with folks, it can be a way. I mean, I have to say, I use it. I'm fascinated by it. It's incredible. But I also feel like a lot of people that are excited about it aren't looking at the second and third order effects.
Yes,
they're not thinking about power laws, Jevons paradox, multipolar traps. They're not thinking about who controls it, how so much is influenced by it, nor are they thinking about the immense energy demand they're going to have and how we're going to sustain that.
Yeah, for sure. So coming back to you, and then, so you did your PhD, and then how did you then go out into the world after you, or did you, or were you?
Well, it took 10 months for my PhD to be assessed. So two of the examiners did it quite quickly within a couple of months, and one person just took a very long time. And I was still, because I hadn't done a master's, I was still getting paid for my lecturing roles at like a undergraduate rate. So I had to supplement my income. So this is where I dialed up the speaking at schools. I had some reputation there. My supervisor was very good in that department too. And I found that I really enjoyed lecturing and speaking. I found that when I was lecturing, though, I couldn't stand marking assignments. Like they drove me nuts. But the actual teaching and the facilitation of it, relatable, but the teaching and facilitation was marvelous. And so in terms of the feeling of calling, I felt when you can find things that are both energizing and effortless.
Yes, yeah.
That's something special to
or even that re-energizes you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's there's something in that. And for different people it's different things, and there's something, even though I'm an introvert and I don't necessarily seek attention, there's something about the conditions of having a captive audience and knowing that we can arrive at a deeper epiphany because we have time and implicit permission to kind of establish context, and that's it's a beautiful and rare thing. So I enjoy what I do. Yeah.
And so you started talking to schools, and you mentioned, what was it, teaching students about exams? And
I had this sense of, well, it was just an angle, really. There's a way exams were a big feature, particularly in Western Australia, and a lot of students would suffer immensely for exams, and there's this arbitrary challenge that is placed on to the end of teenagers' high school times to go in order to determine which university course they get into. And I had something to offer that was a different way to approach exams. I wrote a book called How to Enjoy Exams, and that went well, but I increasingly started to share some of my research. I started to share what was happening in World of Warcraft. Kids were able to relate to that. Found that there's actually, when it comes to the land of motivational speakers, there's a lot of pretty hokey, outdated, pretty egoistic, individualistic ideas getting promulgated still today. And there's avenue for more of a, even though I don't quite like the game changer, my first book, I felt like I was trying to, appeal to executives, whereas my later one was a bit more irreverent. I still feel that when it comes to motivation, most of Western society still takes a very individualistic and mechanistic view of it. And we could have something that's much more ecological, much more living systems orientated, much more attuned to meaningness.
Yes, yeah. I wonder if you come across BJ Fogg.
I used to quote his work a lot.
But just when you're talking about motivation, like I'm pretty sure it's him that he says motivation really, you shouldn't depend on it really.
No, that's right.
You should set up systems that that make you act in spite of motivation.
And I think that makes sense in enterprise contexts or things with like goals work, for formulaic work with predictable outcomes where there's like a routine or a regularity attached to it. And a lot of enterprise work does have that, and a lot of the habits that we have do require us to lower the motivational threshold and come up with the appropriate triggers at the right time in order to get us to act despite our feelings of motivation. And yet also I feel like even I've moved on from the term motivation. All these terms end up getting corrupted. I use the term leadership now, but that's also super naff. Like I don't feel comfortable with it either. But there's a sense of attuning to unmet need or attuning to an emergent need. And are you familiar with John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis?
No. I need to get a list of resources.
Yeah, with the show notes. So John Vervaeke, this is in the pandemic, had this 50-episode YouTube lecture series called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't listened to them, but
they're very good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Orientation towards relevance realization is at the core of what contributes to a sense of meaning and purpose. Orientation towards relevance realization. I'd call this meaningful progress. It's kind of this sense of when you can orientate your actions to something that you feel like, actually, this is meaningful. Either I'm growing or deepening or learning, or my actions are actually resulting in betterment for others and stuff like that. The more that we can do that, the more meaningful and fulfilled we're going to be.
For sure. So then, why did you decide to come to Melbourne?
Oh, because Kim, my wife,
okay.
I met her. She was doing her veterinary science degree. I was doing my environmental science. Kim is originally from Melbourne, so we graduated around the same time, and it was time for her to move back to Melbourne. It was time for me to start a new chapter. So that's how. And
then coming to Melbourne, how did you get going? Like, what were the first?
It was really challenging. I did tactics that worked back in parochial Western Australia that didn't work here, like pamphlet drops at schools and driving around, and it ultimately had to come down to networking. I showed up. I knew that the role that I played at events and things like that is something that I was seeking to maintain. So I was part of the Professional Speakers Association, and I just tried to make myself useful and helpful to people, and eventually it started to translate into being recommended for work. And the good thing is with speaking is that the more you do, the more you do. So you do a good job, plenty of people see you do a good job, that leads to more work where you do a good job, and so on. Until a pandemic comes, and then you don't do events. And also, to be honest, until you burn out and you get super jaded with your industry because of the number of I'm trying to be more nice. I'm not trying not to punch down, but there's a lot of there's this terrible saying. I can't stand how true it is. Winston Marsh said, "It's better to be a better marketer of what you do than a doer of what you do," and it is unfortunately true. And I can't stand it. So I've focused on trying to be a better doer of what I do, but really, the ones that tend to succeed well in this are the better marketers.
And so
that's okay.
In terms of doing what you do, what is that doing that really gives you a sense of purpose or a sense of meaning or re-energizes you?
So here we're going to go into domains that are just a lot easier to describe in terms of magic. I call myself the Archwizard of Ambiguity, most fantastic. I don't know why. I said it once and it stuck, and it baffles people. And I love that it baffles people. There's this poem by Wendell Berry that says that the end bit of it is that the mind that is not baffled is unemployed. The impeded stream is the one that sings. And Nassim Taleb says, difficulty awakens the genius. And I see from my perspective in living systems, when I look at enterprise land, you have so much sterility and domestication, and there's grooming towards efficiency, where people are so used to finding the easy path, the neat path, the measurable path, that it's completely robbing them of the ability to see these other portals of perception, these doorways of perception. And so partly, when I come into a context, it's to intentionally cultivate the conditions for emergence. Partly this is done via thoughtful provocations and creating a space of generative ambiguity. And there is, in a leadership or a strategy offsite, there's a framework dance and stuff like that, but really it's getting people to that deepened point of starting to hear the questions that sit behind the questions. Like you've got the main ones, but what's really driving that? And if you can be attuned energetically to the what's happening in the room, sometimes you can surface like the unspoken, the kind of the thing that people are pretending to not know. And when that's surfaced, you then start to cultivate other perspectives, and you can create this shift that is like an epiphany that then triggers an insight cascade, which triggers greater realization, greater depth and understanding, and it's profound what can manifest if we're willing to court the generative ambiguity and the conditions for emergence. But most of the battle for me is working with clients and just getting them to accept that it's okay that we don't know what all the content is and that we don't have it all mapped out and planned. Let's just come up and create the space and the container where emergence can occur.
And you offer these to like groups of executives, or is it?
Yeah, so I work with executive teams in strategy and leadership development. And normally, I have done leadership programs over time. I'm a little hesitant at the moment because the last one that I did was during the pandemic times, and I was working across a global team, and I just found that I was getting ping-ponged between different leaders, and I was like, hang on, this is way more hidden work than I had intended. But normally, normally what's happening is you've got folks that have budget for a leadership program or strategy development, and I'm tacked on as the kind of something out of left field. Yep. If I'm honest, sorry, I'm going to start being honest now, just from this moment.
Good time as any.
That's right.
Yeah.
Just as we
World
wrap
needs
up. I don't think strategy happens on strategy offsites. And this fast that is perpetuated. Yep. Real strategy happens when you can create the conditions of genius, collective genius, where you have mutual enthusiasm and encouragement for each other, where it's psychologically safe to be daring and to hazard ideas and so on. And so you're tending to the relationality of it all. Yeah. And then you let the strategy grow like weeds, and there's space to experiment and learn and stuff like that. It's not this brainstorm with post-it notes and come up with your top 3 ideas and then vote on them. And it's just and yet that's the theatre that a lot of executives want.
I worked as a strategy consultant.
Oh, right, yes. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, of course, yeah.
You're absolutely right in that I don't think we really helped any organizations in terms of improving in any meaningful way. The organizations that were good, would remain to be good. The organizations that suck, we're not going to help them be better. For them, we were just a tick box that, hey, we did this, we got a report. Now,
And I think, I got to put my mercenary cap on sometimes. Sometimes you just got to do the dance, because it helps to pay the bills. And sometimes you can smuggle in some sensibilities, plant some seeds, and leave people thinking, maybe there's more,
But I think, that's what I think is great with what you do, is maybe you run these sessions, it's not the immediate effects that happen, but maybe you plant that seed with someone. And then
except sometimes the people will get the immediate survey afterwards, just rank out of 5, how good do you feel that session was? Inevitably it comes out 4 out of 5, which is the most mediocre result you can get. And there's part of me that just feels, actually sometimes it's more effective for people to be left feeling agitated and disturbed and unsure, because that could lead to
you.
Exactly. Better to have like a few folk love and a few folk hate than just everyone merely like you. And I can understand for the people, this is where incentives come into play, right? Because some people, their job is just to make sure they run an effective event, and they need to collect data that says that they did so. And once you see the pantomime of it all, you see the illusions and the constructs, and just like, guys, can we just can we bypass all of that and do some great work?
Yeah. Speaking of which, for you now, like, what would great work mean for you?
I used to have a ready definition. So my pull string definition is like, great work is work that goes above and beyond the default, that involves curiosity, empathy, and discretionary effort. My definition, I would say great work is work that could be considered meaningful progress. Meaningful progress is that which brings us closer to future relevance, and future relevance is that whatever we're doing makes sense given the context that has emerged. So inherently, meaningful progress means we're paying attention, we're curious, we're empathetic, and we're looking to align our efforts and behaviours towards relevance realization. But I also accept that if we put back on this meaning thing, particularly if we adopt a mythic lens, a lot of what feels like setback and challenge and betrayal and heartbreak are profoundly meaningful events. We just can't see it at the time, And so there is this thing of like, just keep going, you know.
Yeah.
To quote from Rilke, just keep going. No feeling is final. Experience it all, beauty, terror, just keep going.
Yeah. And I think that's something we can learn from artists as well. You know, it's the, you know, it's the number of drafts that writers take to get published. It's, you know, it's the volume of crap that no one hears Bob Dylan practicing, but you just hear him, you know, on stage. It's, but I think maybe it comes back to your calling. Like if this is your calling.
Yeah. There's this, I'm reading the work of Bill Plotkin at the moment. He's written a book called Soulcraft, Wild Mind, and Soul Initiation.
Yeah.
And this sense of our soul work or our dharma, or, you know, I find it so personally fascinating, but it's also quite scary at the moment because everything that I'm being called to is seemingly not commercially viable right now, you know. It's like the artist within me yearns for particular things, and there's like the pragmatist that's still having to contend with it all, and I'm trying to alchemize this tension. So the midlife crisis I was referring to, I'm like, what does meaningful progress look like for me?
Or maybe it's you need a bit of both, like the pragmatist and the artist. You know,
I think, and sometimes it's an oscillation, and sometimes there's seasons, and sometimes you can moonlight and daylight, and there's definitely a dynamism. I think we have to be realistic about this. We can't all just go off and be poets and artists. Not in this economy.
That's true. Also, have you seen the Peter Jackson documentary of the Beatles, where he?
No.
It's incredible, and I think it's a masterclass on creativity.
I look forward to the show notes. This is going to be great.
But one thing that struck me was how, like, the role George played in the group was he was the pragmatist. You know, John and Paul would have these crazy ideas. Hey, we're going to rent a Coliseum and have this amazing concert, and George will pull them down to earth.
And it's interesting then thinking about it from Gurdjieffian fourth way sense, where we have these different parts within ourselves. So like there's a pragmatist within us, there's the dreamer within us, there's all these different aspects of our own persona that sometimes work in chorus with each other, and sometimes are in conflict with each other. Which then, if we were to reference Robert Keegan's work and Lisa LaHaye, who wrote a book called Immunity to Change, often one of the things that holds us back from being able to enact meaningful behaviour change is hidden commitments or conflicting values. So you have this situation where you actually value both these things. It's like you value the idealism, but you also value, you know, putting food on the table for your family and so on. So you've got to kind of work out. Neither is good or bad. We just got to work out how do we.
And also, it's your level of what you're willing to tolerate. You know, for me personally, I feel that there's this entrepreneur in me, but I'm not willing to go down to zero because I've done that before and it sucked.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yes.
Speaking of going down to zero, is there a...
Is that a segue to crypto?
Is there a failure that you feel taught you the most?
Well, I will mention the crypto thing. I was swept up in it all, and
I didn't know that.
there's part of me, I find the actual true vision of it, publicly owned, transparent, decentralized, trust minimized, open source ledgers, I find it's just an incredible technology, particularly when coupled with regenerative finance, not so much in terms of an offset thing, but for folks that own land and want to demonstrate the good work that they're doing and be recognized for it in a way that is trust minimized. I think it's incredible. We're still very early in that regard. But a few years ago, I'd done quite well, but then the cascade of events that happened, Russia invading Ukraine, and then the major centralized exchange blowing up, kind of saw a lot of our funds kind of diminish. You know, the dream of a lot of dreams that I had about I can finally write the Choose Your Own Adventure series that I really wanted to write, kind of I was forced to contend with the fact, oh no, I'm going to have to go back to enterprise land, and I mean, though I love the work, it just was shattering in that regard. Plus, there's also the sense of personal failure, because it was both Kim and I's money that I was managing.
Oh dear.
But things have recovered since then, and there's a portion that will be received back from that. And if anything, though, it catalyzed my distrust of centralized entities for things like that, and it's pushed me further on chain into decentralized protocols. But that was quite catalyzing. But I'm also looking back on it, the kind of, there was a few things that happened. I became meta-crisis aware, which is where you have the insight cascade of seeing how interlinked a lot of the challenges of our world are, of climate change, food crisis, energy crisis, social inequality. All these things have this similar underlying generator functions, and the pathway out of it remains non-obvious, and so we seem set on a self-terminating path of exponential extinctions, and AI is going to only accelerate that. So that made me a little bit depressed. But then ultimately led to, because of that sinking so low, led me to have this profound healing experience via plant medicine last year, in a really beautiful context, and so many things opened up for me in one of the most profound ways ever.
Wow.
Yeah.
So incredible. I mean, that, I think, because I have a plant medicine experience as well.
Oh, right.
That's, I think, a whole other episode.
Great. Yes, I look forward to it.
Or maybe a chat over a coffee sometime.
Perfect. Yeah.
But unfortunately, the pragmatist in me now has to wrap up our conversation. But I suppose just like the name of this podcast is Finding Meaning in Work. And my hope is that people listening to this will take some action to do that. What advice would you give someone who's listening?
I would say that meaning is a relational dance, and we need to all embrace a little bit of the trickster spirit in how we approach meaning. Don't try to look for meaning as some sort of fixed object to hold on to. You will be disappointed. If you instead see it as a dance, to be like a mystery to be experienced and enjoyed, not a problem to be solved, things will start to get better.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the dance, Jason, and
I've enjoyed this dance. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, and I really appreciate the time you've taken to come over here and record this with me.
And thanks for the generosity of your questions. It was super lovely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you're enjoying and are learning from this podcast, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. A great zero-cost way to support us is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you are feeling extra generous, it'd be great if you could leave a comment or feedback on our Apple Podcast or YouTube pages. Or you could email your comments and feedback to me directly at rahul@disruptivebusinessnetwork.com. That's RAHUL@disruptivebusinessnetwork, all one word, .com. Finally, a big shout out to our producer Dan Scahill for his work on the keys, and to Vashti Civil for writing the original music for our theme. Until next time, this is your host, Rahul Sohn, signing off. Bye.